What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another edition of RHOX Garage. I'm your host, Dan, and on today's episode, we're going to be installing part number LIFT-105 on our Yamaha Drive. Now, the install process for this also applies to the electric versions of the Yamaha Drive2 as well. So before we get started, let's take a look at everything that comes in that kit and the tools we're going to need to perform the installation. When you open up your kit, you're going to have your driver and your passenger side spindles. You're going to have your rear drop U-bracket, your connecting rod bracket, and your bag of hardware. So now we've taken a look at everything that comes in the kit. Let's take a look at the tools we're going to need to perform the install. All right, so first up we have our cordless impact with a 19mm socket. After that we have our cordless drill with a small drill bit for drilling pilot holes and a 27/64 drill bit. After that we have our ratchet wrench and extension with a 10mm, 14mm, 17, 18, and 19mm sockets. After that we have a 12mm, 14mm, and 17mm open-ended wrenches, as well as a 3/4 inch open-end wrench. We have a flathead screwdriver, some needle nose pliers, a dead blow or a rubber mallet, a tape measure. Lastly, we have a utility knife and, of course, some safety glasses. Now, before we get started, we just want to go over a few safety precautions. So first, we want to make sure that we turn our cart off. Then we're going to set our parking brake. And if we have an electric cart, we're going to flip the tow run switch to the tow position. After that, we're going to go ahead and chock our rear wheels and go ahead and jack the front of the cart up and secure it on some jack stands. And now that our cart is up in the air, we can go ahead and remove our wheels and tires. So now that we have our wheels and tires off the cart, we can go ahead and disconnect our hub as well as remove our tie rod from the spindle. So typically on your spindle end and on your tie rod end, there are cotter pins that hold the bolts and nuts in place. However, on our cart, those were not there, but I do want to remind you that those are supposed to be there, so when we go to reinstall everything, we are going to make sure that we put those cotter pins back on. Now, before we remove our spindle from the cart, we're going to go ahead and remove our steering knuckles from the spindle. And now with our steering knuckle removed, we can go ahead and remove our spindle. With our OE spindle removed, we can go ahead and install our new drop spindle. But before we do that, we need to make sure that we attach our steering knuckle onto the spindle, as well as put our sleeve and our spacers into the spindle as well. So now with our spindle installed on the cart, we can go ahead and reattach our tie rod end as well as reinstall our hub. Now remember, like I said earlier, we are going to be putting cotter pins on both of those installs. Now again, just remember, when you go ahead and reinstall your hub and your tie rod end, you do want to make sure that you put cotter pins in both of those. Now that we have our hub reinstalled on our passenger side, we can go ahead and repeat all of the same processes over on the driver's side of the cart. So now that we have all of the components on the front end installed, we're going to go ahead and raise the cart up a little bit more and install our new wheels and tires. Once that's done, we're going to flip the cart around and begin the installation on the rear of the cart. So now that we have our cart flipped around, we want to make sure that we chock those front wheels before we go ahead and raise the back end of the cart up. Once those front wheels are chocked, we can go ahead, raise the back end of the cart up, and secure it on some jack stands. After that, we can go ahead and remove our wheels and tires, as well as our rear access panel. So now that we have our wheels and tires and our access panel removed, our next step is to disconnect our 3-pin plug for the motor. You'll also notice that we went ahead and off-camera took the fender wells out. Now that step is not 100% necessary, but we did do that to make filming this install a little bit easier. So now that we have our 3-pin connector disconnected, we can go ahead and begin the process of lowering the axle down. Before we do anything, we want to make sure that we put the jack back underneath of the rear axle to support the weight of it. Once that's done, we can go ahead and remove the top side of our connecting rod as well as the top of our 2 shock towers. So now that our axle is dropped down, our next step is to install our rear U-bracket. Now when you've received your U-bracket, you'll notice that there is an angle to the bracket. That angle is going to face towards the front of the cart. Now when we bolt it in at the top, we're going to be using the supplied hardware, and when we bolt the shock towers into the bottom of the bracket, we're going to use the OE hardware. So now that our rear U-bracket is installed, our next step is to install our new connecting rod drop bracket. But before we do that, we need to remove the bolt that is on the driver's side of the bag well, and then we're going to go ahead and clear out that hole with our drill bit. So now that the hole is drilled in our bag well, we can go ahead and install our connecting rod drop bracket, and we can go ahead and attach our connecting rod to that drop bracket. Once that's done, we can go ahead and tighten down all of the hardware on the rear of the cart, jack the cart up a little bit higher, and install our new wheels and tires. So now before we install our rear tires, we do need to make a little bit of a trim to the rear fender well. So on both sides, we're going to have to cut this corner off of the front of the rear fender well, just so we can make our tires fit. And you want to make sure that you trim that to the size of your tires. So on this cart, we're going to be using a 23-inch tire, so we're going to have to trim a little bit more than if you were using a 21 or a 22-inch tire. So now that our cart is safely lowered back down onto the ground, we can go ahead and reconnect our 3-pin connector. Once that's done, we can go ahead and reinstall our access panel. Then we're going to flip the cart around and perform our front end alignment. So now that we have our cart turned back around, we want to make sure that we turn the cart off, set our parking brake, and if you have an electric cart, we're going to flip the tow run switch to the tow position. So when performing our front end alignment, we want to make sure that we have an 1/8 to a 1/16 of an inch toe in, which means the front end of the tires is going to be an 1/8 to a 1/16 of an inch closer together than the rear of the tires. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure both the front and the rear of the tires center to center, get our measurements, and then we're going to make the adjustments on the tie rod ends. We're going to go back and forth, making sure that we have that 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch toe in. So before we take any of our measurements, we want to make sure that we straighten out our steering wheel. We want to make sure that that steering wheel is centered so that when we do our alignment, everything stays centered on the cart. Once that steering wheel is aligned, we can go ahead and make our measurements on the front and the rear of the tires. So on the front of our tires, our measurement is 41 3/4 inches. So then I'm going to measure pretty much the exact same spot on the rear of the tires. And then on the rear, we are at 42 3/4. So we want to make sure that we bring the back end of the tires closer together. So then in order to make any of the adjustments, we're going to go ahead and release the lock nut on the tie rod end, and then we can make the adjustments on each side. When we make the adjustments, we want to make sure that we make an even adjustment on both sides. So if on the passenger side, I do 2 half turns with the tie rod end, I want to go over to the driver's side and do the same thing. So once I make an equal adjustment on both sides, I'm going to go ahead and remeasure and then repeat the same process if I still need to make any adjustments. Now on the front of the tires, I am 42 1/4. So once you've made your adjustments and you've gotten your toe into 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, we're going to go ahead and tighten down those jam nuts. So once you have your alignment set properly, that's going to do it for the install on part number LIFT-105 on our Yamaha Drive. Thanks for watching this episode of RHOX Garage. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time.